I found myself standing at the foot of a lonely hill in Louisville, Kentucky, staring at the crumbling remains of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The building was surrounded by twisted trees and the thick mist that rolled in from the woods, creating an eerie atmosphere. This place, once a cutting-edge tuberculosis treatment center, now stood as a haunting monument to the countless souls lost within its walls. The story of Waverly Hills begins in the early 1900s, when tuberculosis, or the White Death, was claiming lives by the thousands. Louisville was hit especially hard, and in 1910, Waverly Hills opened as a small wooden building to quarantine and treat the sick. But as the disease spread, they needed more space. By 1926, they constructed a massive 5-story Gothic building to house over 400 patients. What was supposed to be a place of healing became a site of overwhelming death. I learned that, at its peak, Waverly Hills became a death trap. The doctors, desperate for a cure, resorted to experimental treatments that seemed almost medieval: collapsing lungs, rib removal, freezing temperatures, all in the name of hope. But death came far more often than recovery, and it's believed over 6,000 people died there. To spare the living from the sight of all the bodies, the staff used a secret passage, the death tunnel, or body chute. It led from the hospital down the hill to a railroad line, where the deceased were quietly carted away. Some say the tunnel still holds the echoes of those lost souls, their cries and whispers lingering in the dark. When I walked into the death tunnel, I felt an oppressive cold that made my stomach churn. I heard the squeak of gurney wheels on old tracks, but no one was around. The darkness seemed to move with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And then there's room 502, the most infamous room in Waverly Hills. In 1928, a young nurse was found hanging in that very room, pregnant and ashamed. Some say she ended her life, others believe something darker was at play. Years later, another nurse jumped to her death from the same window. It's a room that never quite feels empty. People hear crying coming from behind its locked door. Some claim they see a woman in white staring out of the window, but when they approach, she's gone. I've heard investigators report cameras short-circuiting, batteries draining instantly, and investigators being scratched or physically pushed. There's always the sense that something is watching you. Then there's Timmy, a child patient who once lived here. He loved playing with a leather ball, and even today, visitors leave balls in the hallways. It's not uncommon for the balls to roll back toward them, change direction, or bounce on their own. One investigator even caught a glimpse of a small shadow darting into a doorway after hearing what sounded like a child's laughter. Waverly Hills closed in 1961, but its story didn't end. Even after it briefly reopened as a geriatric center, the building was left abandoned. Yet it's still alive in its own way. Paranormal teams capture unexplained sounds, see figures in thermal cameras, and feel the overwhelming sense that the place is far from empty. Some believe Waverly is a spiritual trap, its energy trapped in the building, feeding on fear. I could feel it myself when I stood in the darkness of the place, the sense that something was watching, waiting. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear the faint, slow heartbeat of Waverly Hills, echoing through the darkened halls. I was drawn to Eloise Psychiatric Hospital, located on the outskirts of Westland, Michigan, by its haunting reputation. The sprawling grounds once housed over 10,000 patients in its prime, and its buildings were filled with suffering, secrets, and unexplainable occurrences. Now, all that remains are the remnants of its past, a past buried in neglect, abuse, and death. Eloise started in the 1830s as a poorhouse before becoming a psychiatric hospital in the late 19th century. It was meant to help those suffering from mental illness, but soon became a place where pain and suffering were the norm. The hospital became notorious for overcrowding, mistreatment, and brutal treatments that would be considered barbaric by today's standards, like insulin coma therapy, hydrotherapy, and lobotomies. But many of the people who were sent there didn't belong at all. They were institutionalized for things like grief or anxiety. Most never left. The underground tunnels that connected the buildings seemed to hold as many secrets as the walls themselves. Some urban explorers who braved the tunnels reported seeing shadows darting just out of sight, hearing footsteps when no one was around, and feeling an icy chill touch their skin. But it was the infamous C building that stuck with me the most. It had long since been demolished, but the stories of that place still linger. I read a diary entry from a nurse describing a soldier, Private Harris, who arrived with leg wounds. He quickly descended into madness, claiming that a dark figure stood by his bed every night. His screams stopped one night, and when the nurse found him, his face was twisted in terror. He was dead, and no one could explain why. Other strange phenomena surrounded that building. The room would smell of burnt sulfur for no reason. Equipment would malfunction, and every patient placed in that room died, often quicker than expected. Eventually, the room was sealed off, but the activity didn't stop. I found myself wondering if Eloise was cursed. I heard from locals that at night, figures could be seen standing in the windows, even though the buildings had no electricity. And then there was the story of Grace, a woman institutionalized for postpartum depression. She went missing during a storm, and when her body was found hours later, it wasn't the death that chilled me, but the note she left behind. it's not the people who haunt this place. It's the place that haunts us. Eloise was demolished, but the land still holds its sorrow. The spirits of those who died there remain, lost, forgotten, and trapped in a place that never really let them go. If you're enjoying the darkness we've uncovered so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Black Fog family. New chilling stories and paranormal mysteries drop every week. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's lurking next. Now, back to the story. I had heard of Nocton Hall, tucked away in the peaceful English countryside, but the stories about it were far from peaceful. What was once a grand manor became a military hospital during the World Wars, and it's the dark history of that hospital that haunted me. Nocton Hall has been abandoned for years, but its past still lingers, especially in the infamous Ward 13. The hall was originally built in the 16th century, but during World War I and II, it was repurposed as a field hospital. The Grand Manor was stripped of its beauty, and operating rooms replaced drawing rooms. Ward 13 was located in a small, isolated part of the hospital, and that's where the most disturbing events took place. Many soldiers who were treated in Ward 13 didn't just die, they deteriorated rapidly. Some spoke of a dark figure standing at their bedside. Others claimed a woman visited them every night, whispering in a language they couldn't understand. One nurse documented the case of Private Harris, a soldier who arrived with leg wounds. He quickly spiraled into madness, claiming he was being buried alive. His death was just as terrifying. When they found him, his face was so contorted in fear that the coroner couldn't bring himself to describe it. The smell of sulfur permeated the room for no reason. Equipment malfunctioned only in that ward. Lights flickered, and every patient placed there died. The ward was sealed off, but the horror didn't end there. I read about soldiers who served at Nocton Hall after World War II, including a chaplain who saw a woman in a long black dress pacing the halls. When he approached her, she vanished into the wall where Ward 13 had once been. He left the facility shortly after, filing for reassignment. Urban explorers report hearing strange noises when they visit Nocton Hall, voices, footsteps, and strange cold spots. One group captured an EVP in the old ward that sent chills down my spine. A voice whispering, "Get out." The most terrifying story, though, came from a soldier stationed there in the 1980s. He was checking records in the old archive room when he heard someone weeping behind a wall. When the wall was opened, no one was there, but the power went out shortly after. Panic spread as soldiers reported seeing a floating woman with hollow eyes glide across the floor. That experience haunted them for the rest of their lives. Nocton Hall was decommissioned and left to decay, but the haunting continues. Every person who has entered Ward 13 has either fallen ill, lost time, or been haunted by nightmares. It's a place where dark secrets still fester, and those who venture into its depths may never leave the same, or at all.